Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelzer back with the latest Peace to the End Social Change Career podcast live stream. Today, we're going to be talking with my friend Michael Shipler, who is Vice President of Search for Common Ground and Head of Common Ground Leadership. A couple of things before we get started. So if you haven't attended a live stream previously, we deeply enjoy hearing from people. So whether you're watching on LinkedIn or YouTube, please take a second to let us know where you're watching from. And throughout the session, please put comments, questions, resources, and we'll try to weave them in as much as possible. This is season 15. I think we're on episode 13 or 14. I'll figure that out when this audio episode is released, but it's one of over 200 episodes. So please check out the podcast at PCN Global/listen or any podcasting platform. The number one thing you can do for any podcaster, whether it's this one or whatever favorite ones you have, is just share and rate it. Take 20 seconds on Spotify, Apple, whatever platform, and also just share it because some people make money through podcasting. It's really a labor of love for 99% of the people. Please follow Michael on LinkedIn, check out Search for Common Ground, check out Common Ground Leadership, and check out Peace to the End. So I'm just going to double check to make sure this is working on LinkedIn, which I think it is. Yes. Okay, perfect. And this will go for about 70 minutes. So again, please let us know where you're watching from. So Michael is, already said his titles, he's working on a major effort to accelerate a new model of collaborative leadership around the world. Just slightly ambitious. Common Ground Leadership equips, connects, and supports leaders to work across dividing lines and achieve real results, and draws on Search's decades of experience working in more than 50 of the most divided countries on earth, including in the US. He previously served as Vice President of Strategy at Search, where he led a global team of 16 specialists in strategy, planning, learning, monitoring and evaluation, and capacity building. He guided a transformative strategy process using foresight and scenarios to reimagine the organization's future, served on the executive merger team that brought Preemptive Love Coalition into Search, and led the design of a 10-year impact strategies across 12 countries and thematic teams. From 2012 to 18, he served as regional director for Asia, worked across many countries and helped grow revenue up to 10 million a year. In 2024, he was seconded as the interim CEO of Soliya, where our friend Cameron Chisholm is now the CEO, where he reversed a six-figure deficit and raised almost $2 million in funding and built a U.S. program and negotiated a preliminary merger agreement with AFS Intercultural Programs. And he continues to serve on the board. He was part of the establishment of the Lair Institute for Children, Peace, and Security, and founded the Children and Youth Division at Search for Common Ground, where Saji Periles is working, which went on to help pass UN Security Council Resolution 2250. And he holds an MA in Modern World, MA in the Modern World.
War in the Modern World.
Yeah, war. I missed the war. Sorry, I was going to say MA in the Modern World. From the War Studies Department at King's College, and completed the Disruptive Strategy program with Clayton Christian Certificate Program at Harvard Business School online. Michael and I have known each other for, 20 years. We're getting older. And he really is, one, he's a very cool, inspiring human being, but also just as amazing at thinking at the big picture, but actually not just thinking, but actually, operationalizing. And again, the title of the talk is really, really cool. So Ceding Power to Build Power, the Discipline of Letting Go. And so, Michael, I'm based in Medellin, Colombia. Are you in DC today?
I am in Washington. I'm in Washington, DC.
Thank you. Thank you so much for making time to share your wisdom and experience and questions. So to start off with, let's start with your current work. So it's a very Common Ground Leadership. What is it? And what are the challenges with existing leadership in the world today? And what are you, your colleagues, peers, partners, collaborators trying to do differently?
Yeah, thanks, Craig. Firstly, Craig, thank you for having me on this podcast. I'm thrilled to have a chance to be here. As you know, I love PCDN. I refer people to PCDN all the time and always tell everybody, if you're trying to build a career and impact, you want to have an influence in the world, start there. So I'm just really happy to be here. And yeah, we've known each other. It must be 20, 25 years. You were one of the first people I met as I entered this sector. So what are we trying to do with Common Ground Leadership? So Search for Common Ground is an organization. We're 40 plus years old. We have a presence in currently 28 countries, some of the most divided societies in the world. And it is what we've been doing for years. The through line is bringing people together from across the starkest of divides to work collaboratively, to do real things together, to solve real practical problems. And we've done that in scenarios and situations where those divides are cataclysmic or potentially cataclysmic. So, as you mentioned, from Israel, Palestine to Sudan, South Sudan, and here in the United States, we have a huge program as well. Over the last 4 or 5 years, something really interesting has been happening to us. Leaders from all different kinds of sectors have been coming to us, reaching out and asking for support in a way that we had never really experienced before. I myself have had, presidents of major state universities, senior leaders of major music production and entertainment companies, people in human rights organizations, people in military organizations, people from all different kinds of walks of life, but carrying really heavy leadership loads, come to us and say, the leadership that I've been trained in is not working in the world today. It's not actually enabling me to solve problems. Polarization is blocking me. My staff is divided. All different kinds of things are happening to folks carrying leadership roles. They're being thrust into a position of needing to not only lead through conflict, but play a role in conflict all over the world. And they're really unequipped to do that. The training that people have gotten just doesn't really actually equip them to handle the world that we're in today. And so we made a decision a couple of years back to lean into this, to respond to that demand. We have a technique. It's actually really, you called it a discipline. It is a discipline of leadership, where our leaders at Search step into our and are almost always part of a conflict system that they're in, and are able to forge coalitions across really stark divides to do really powerful things. For us, it's about addressing the root causes of conflict or injustice, what's underneath those very divisions itself. And we decided that we wanted to convert that and make that discipline available to people around the world, not just available, but actually to proliferate it. Because we actually need our leaders to be collaborating. We need our leaders to be reaching out across divides. Right now, that's not such a popular thing for somebody in leadership to do. And yet we really need that, because we know that it solves real problems. We know that it actually generates progress. We know that this kind of leadership actually builds benefits for folks. So we've launched Common Ground Leadership, and that's the initiative that I'm leading now.
And how would you describe, because there's like the Jack Welch type of, business leadership, like basically be an asshole. I'm sorry to use that word, but like be an asshole and just like, boss people around, or, there's kind of crazy models of leadership, and a lot of what's taught, not just in business school, but international relations, or just, if you want to move up the corporate hierarchy or nonprofit hierarchy, it's often, everybody's accountable to somebody, but there's often like, a small group of people or one person at the top. And how would you say your vision of leadership, or Search's vision of leadership, how would you define it, let's say, in comparison to what's being taught or experienced in many of the universities and organizations of the world today?
So I would start with the idea of adversarial leadership versus collaborative leadership. And, an adversarial leadership model is one where we start with the idea of win-lose. I and my team has to win at all costs. That means that our competition, people who are in opposition to us, people who are trying to block us, they need to lose. We need to barrel through them. And that is a dominant model that we see in the world today. Here in Washington, D.C., you hear people who are members of Congress or work on staff of members of Congress talk about how it's even high risk for them to even have, be seen having a coffee or have lunch with somebody from across the political divide in this country. That is a norm that we see all over the world. And what we teach is actually collaborative leadership. And this is the core idea behind this, is that by bringing people together from across all different kind of sectors, all the stakeholders who are part of a critical challenge, a critical problem, and especially those who you see as potentially the term I like to use is perceived adversary, term coined by one of my colleagues in in Nigeria who talked about, we talk about adversaries, but not everybody is actually an adversary. It's about the perception of that adversarial relationship. And so that actually by bringing people who are in that position of a perceived adversary into a coalition, you actually build a different kind of power, collective power, where you're able to see a diverse set of perspectives, all the different perspectives on a critical challenge that might be facing you. You're able to access different kinds of communities and resources. You're able to find ideas that are really practical and solution oriented. That actually, by having people work across divides, it generates a higher order of solution, and a higher, not just a higher order of solution, but a higher order of solutions that are much less likely to have opposition, and therefore are much more likely to be enduring. We talk about this at searches with the word that we use is multi-partiality. It's a bit of a wonky word, but it's worth kind of stepping in, and it sounds sort of super academic, but and if anybody on the podcast has a better word, we're always open to it. But here's the concept. We're not impartial, so we're not outside any kind of conflict environment. And nobody actually who's part of any kind of context can be impartial. People are partial. They have a part to play. What we've learned is that when you have all the different stakeholders with all the different parts to play coming together around a problem, sharing their views, perspectives, ideas, best thinking, resources, it creates collective problem solving power that's much more likely to solve that problem. And that concept is multi-partiality. And so this is really what we teach people and what we use. We've used this tool and this approach, this discipline, to trigger all kinds of breakthroughs in all kinds of contexts around the world.
So just a quick note, John Marks, the founder of Search, was on the podcast maybe 2 years ago. So you can also, get an organizational historical perspective from that. And so thinking back, going back a little bit to your younger years. So did you, I know your father worked in journalism. I'm not sure about your mother, but did you envision yourself working around international affairs or collaborative leadership? Did you want to be a dentist, an astronaut, or did you kind of see a profession or an area of challenges you wanted to work on, or how did you start building the skills and career to be working around development, leadership, and impact?
My mother was a social worker. She was a teacher for part of her career, but she was most of my childhood. She was a social worker, and she worked with teenage girls mostly in families. And she, in her work, she had to draw a connection between the individual lived experience and the broader systems that people lived in and occupied, and how people navigate those things. My father, as you mentioned, was a journalist. He was a foreign correspondent, so he lived abroad. And my very young years I spent in Jerusalem. So the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was one that was always super present in my family dynamic. Before that, we were in Moscow. I was a baby, so don't have memories of that time. But the fall of the Berlin Wall was a very significant and marking event. And before I was born, my whole family was in Vietnam at the end of the war there. My uncle was also a journalist, and he left Saigon on April 30th, 1975, on one of the last helicopters. So there has always been in my family life a through line around conflict and the effects of conflict on people and individuals, and that connection between individuals' lived experiences and conflict. So when I came out of college, once I realized I was not going to be a professional baseball player, which was
Let's stop there. So did you? I did 1 year. I did 1 year of Little League. I hated it, and so that is not my sport. But did you have strong baseball skills, or play on a school team, or?
I played Little League baseball, played second base for my Little League team up until I was 14, and when pitchers started throwing curveballs, I yeah, I was done. I never got a hit again,
Okay. Okay.
and retired from the game. Sadly, I had an incredible Little League coach, though, a guy by the
Mhm.
name of Chuck Cohn, who taught about leadership in the most fundamental way, actually, together with an assistant coach called Bill Wright, and these two gentlemen taught me about inclusion, about treating people with dignity. Our team always either won or lost the championship. Every single year, we were either first or second. And these gentlemen were profoundly inclusive, and everybody had their playing time, and they knew how to celebrate each and every step and win. So, in some ways, I owe a lot of how I see leadership and exert my own leadership to my Little League baseball time and those coaches, I have to say.
I want to go back because we were talking before. Your daughter
Yeah.
plays. My son plays football. Your daughter plays football or soccer, depending on But I mean, just getting to this, I did a lot of sports, and I was good at some things, but not great. But just, I want to. This is kind of a random thing. How did your coaches, or if you've ever coached, because there are players who are really good, and there's a lot of good players, and there's some players who maybe are not as skilled, and a lot depends on the team, the terrain. But from your coach's perspective or your perspective, particularly if you want to move ahead towards the championship, whatever sport, how did the coaches balance that desire to win with trying to ensure, like, I mean, I was, like, for example, I played American football. I was horrible at it. Like, suppose I started, they would take me out. So how do you balance, like, someone who really doesn't have the talent or aptitude or desire versus, like, ensuring everyone has a chance?
Coach Cohen would never pull the worst players, even in the critical moments of the game. Everybody
Mhm.
got their chance. And he's like, if we're in a critical moment, it's because we got here together. And there's only one opportunity to succeed, and that's if you get up to bat. And it was incredible because we would see people who, would perform way above their skill, their
Mhm.
their baseline skill level, in the most high pressure moments on that team. And that was how he handled it. One
Mhm.
of my favorite stories about that, since we're on this, is when we lost a championship game once, 26-4 or something like that, and it was a rough loss. And our coach pulled us off to the side afterwards, and the other team kind of, there was no moment of drama, right? They walked off like, "Yay, we won." The coach pulled out a cooler filled with sparkling cider, which is, of course, in American sports tradition. When you win the championship, you pour
Mhm.
champagne over each other. And he pulled it out. He's like, "Gentlemen, it was an all boys team. It's like, gentlemen, it was an amazing thing to get to the final. We got to celebrate that." Shook the bottle and started spraying us all, and within seconds, we were all celebrating. What he understood was that showing up is itself its own victory, and performing your very best is its own victory. So I think that those things have kind of there is a through line. It's interesting that you're asking these questions. There is a through line for me. I've witnessed a lot of great leadership in my life. I've been really lucky to have been around people who assert leadership that is profoundly inclusive and understands that the best leaders are the ones who get the most out of the collective.
Mhm.
So that accomplishment and achievement comes from that. And that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that as a through line. Here
Mhm.
I am trying to teach people how to do that all over the
Yeah.
world, but even in the most dire and dangerous contexts and
I mean,
circumstances.
we'll move on, but yeah, obviously, as well as I do, there's a huge discipline of sport for development or peace building, and there are, and then also, if you haven't seen the movie, I think it's called Last Goal Wins. It's
Mm,
I forgot the exact name, but it's about the worst World Cup qualifying team in history, or something, or regional, like in the Asia Cup, and it's like American Samoa, and they lose. I won't spoil the movie, but they have like one of the worst defeats in history. So it's a fictionalized version of a true story, but it's like a lot of it is about teamwork and kind of. But and if you think of the bad news bears back to when we were young. Anyway, so so when you're thinking about your career as you were in high school or entering university, and you realize that professional baseball might not be the way, like, did you have like burning questions, or you found a discipline or disciplines that engaged you, or you envisioned a particular profession? Like, how did you start making those decisions?
So what happened was I had an internship at a law firm in DC my senior year of high school, which was doing pro bono legal services for refugees, almost all from El Salvador and Guatemala. This is in the mid-90s, so this was a time when you know uh, it was at the end of the conflicts there, and so I was doing intake interviews for potential clients, and one of the questions I had to ask was, have you or your family ever been harmed or threatened by an armed actor in your country? And I was 17, applying for college, all that stress that comes with American kids,
Mhm.
applying for college, American middle class kids. That's the highest level of stress, right? And a 17-year-old, one of my basically a counterpart, came in for the interview. She was from El Salvador, and so I asked the question, and almost deadpan, she told me her story as I was taking notes, and she said basically the military had come, pulled her brother out of the front of the house, and shot him. She saw it happen through the window, ran out, literally the back door, and fled, and had walked almost to Washington. And I sat there and I listened to this, and I thought, oh man, here is my counterpart sitting at the same table as me, and I'm, agonizing. Do I apply for Haverford or Brown or Dartmouth? And here she is trying to figure out how to get a piece of paper to let her stay here and find somebody to provide her free legal services. And I was so struck by that it just started me down a pathway of thinking about my counterparts and other young people around the world and in my own country, and trying to understand, well, what is it that we're going through. And I started really down this path of youth and youth leadership, um, and the role of youth and the effects of conflict on youth, and it was a peer to peer thing, and that was really what set my path in motion.
Interesting. I mean, that totally different story, but I'm probably a few years older than you. But I was curious as a young person because I used to worry about nuclear Armageddon, which most young people, I mean, don't worry about. I wasn't losing sleep, but it's just like the idea like there could be such horrific nature of weapons in the world, and I got curious, like why, like are people really that different? So, and then I did junior abroad, which totally changed my world. And went to Hungary at the end of the Cold War, and I worked as a waiter once in the U.S. and I had let's say a temporary girlfriend from Serbia, from Yugoslavia, and I visited her pre-war, and we were actually doing an interrail when the war broke out, and that kind of personal. I mean, it wasn't my war, but like that personal experience of being in the places where the war happened, and then watching a country implode, and then later on doing some work with refugees. But it's like that kind of personal experience is not some distant statistic over there or some random thing you read in a newspaper. And a lot of people say we're all just lucky to be born. Wherever we're born, we're born. I mean, who knows why? And
Yeah,
like just because someone is born somewhere else in conditions that are more difficult, like they still have the same value. So I want to move on. So you did college, and then how did you start working? I mean, did you go to Cambodia and start doing peer support work with gang involved youth? Did you like, how did you start doing things? I mean, you grew up partially overseas, but how did you start doing like the work with migrants and refugees from El Salvador? Obviously was a huge impact, and I assume you spoke some Spanish or good Spanish at that
I
point.
did. I did because I had done an exchange program in high school in Argentina. I had lived
Okay.
in northeastern Argentina, with a family who I'm still very close with, actually, for part of my junior year of high
Hmm.
school. So I spoke Spanish. No, one of the things that was really quite powerful for me was that, I kind of came away from that. It was with AFS, intercultural programs,
Hmm.
and I came away from that experience like, I want to build relationships across divide,
Hmm.
or across cultures. I want to have and I realized, very early on that that's a nice ideal for somebody sitting in a position of privilege. But that when we're in a world where there's such profound inequities, injustices, there's oppression, that those things go together actually, and all of the work around it doesn't always acknowledge or deal with actually what is dividing people.
Hmm.
I out of college, I spent a few months, working in Guatemala for a professor named Anita Isaacs, who was one of my professors in college, and I had a great job, which really set me up, I think, intellectually for a lot of what I've been doing, which was, it was a story collection job. I
Hmm.
was I was asked to basically capture people's personal stories, and how they intersected with the conflict in Guatemala and the peace process and what had happened to them. And I
Hmm.
talked to traveled all over, and I interviewed all kinds of folks who had experienced so many different kinds of things, who told me their stories. And had one of the most powerful things that happened. One of my favorite stories. I met a guy told me that, the conflict got so intense that he finally had to flee. And after, he was moving around with his family just in their local area, so they're internally displaced. But finally, he decided the most. most effective way to keep himself safe was and his family safe was to join the military.
Mhm.
So he joined the military. This was in the heart of the war. It was a very, very rough civil war. And so he joined the military and he was assigned to a reserve unit. So that meant every Sunday he had to go for training. So the problem was that every Monday to Friday he was with the guerrillas. And he had also said finally had to join a like they had this they call them self defense
Mhm.
civil forces in Guatemala, which were pro government militias set up by the government to basically
Mhm.
take care of communities. And he was also part of that. And he said he and a couple of buddies looked at each other one day and they said, what is this? We are on all three sides of this war. Like each
Mhm.
of us ourselves are on all three sides of this war. And he said finally something broke in them. They were like, this is absurd. And he went and he actually withdrew from the civil defense force. That was where he had some mobility. And so already then at that very early stage, I started with this realization: there isn't black and white. Things are not either or. All of my own sense of righteousness and indignation, sanctimoniousness about justice and injustice, I realized actually none of this actually held up against the real world where things are filled with these nuances and layers and complications. Because this guy had become a political rights activist advocating for democracy and human rights and was traveling around his department in Guatemala working around something central to human dignity after having been on all three combatant sides of a conflict. So
It
that
sounds like
was an early
that would.
start, and I started down that path. Yeah,
It sounds like it would be an amazing book or movie to explore that story in more depth. And I mean, I love we did my dissertation on art, and and so one of my favorite movies is the No Man's Land from Bosnia Herzegovina.
yeah,
Which I saw in Sarajevo during the Sarajevo Film Festival, I think in 2000. But it's like,
oh,
and that's my experience is most people don't want to get involved in war
yeah,
or violence. Like there are some people who, maybe are, let's say, environmentally or, disposed, like not disposed, but like, through conditions or role models, they might be more likely to get into it or just for just the need to survive. But most people don't want to be in war or take sides. But as war or violence increases, polarization increases, and it's very hard for most people to stay across sides. And that's one of the most brutal. I mean, apart from all the violence and human destruction, economic stuff, that separation of identities, where like one primary identity is forced upon people, is terrifying. And it obviously it can happen anywhere. It's not special just that somewhere happens overseas.
it's
So
happening
so
here
thinking,
all the time right
yeah,
now. Yeah,
because I think in the U.S. a lot of people think we're special, and like that, like we have democracy and we're wonderful, and that can never happen here. Of course, it can. It can happen anywhere. So just thinking about, so you did this amazing work in Guatemala, and got to let's say became an expert in listening and captivating and learn. Because one of the most powerful things, in any kind of dialogue process is just the ability to listen and understand multiple perspectives. That, like, I've come to the conclusion, like it's hard for me to do in my own life, but if I'm working with people in other contexts, the ability to hold two or more stories or truths or five truths together is like essential. It's hard to do like when I'm fighting with somebody, but like when
right.
I'm working with. So how did you had this interest in, let's say, injustice, this interest in like what causes people to engage in violence but also resist in violence, how to be impacted by violence. So how did you start turning that into like, oh my gosh, like this is not just something that you could volunteer with, but there actually is some career path. And like, how did you find it? What skills did you get? Where did you land your first roles?
So I had that maddening experience that so many young people have, then applying for all these jobs and being told, you can't, you need experience to do this job, and trying to figure out, well, how do I get experience if I don't have it, if I don't have experience, and that kind of catch 22. And so I did this and that odd end job, saved as much money as I could, and I finally decided to go to Cambodia because I thought, I was looking for a context where some of the things I was really interested in were coming together, and there was a generation. Excuse me. There was a generation of young people in Cambodia who who had grown up through the had grown up through the genocide and the war afterwards, and I was very curious also about what my counterparts were grappling with
Mhm.
there. Uh, it was a place that I'd heard a lot about, met a lot of people from over the years, and so I went. When I arrived, I met an amazing number of youth leaders who had set up an organization called Youth for Peace. The leader was a guy called Utrain. He was working with a number of others, and there were four of them. They had all survived the genocide. They had all survived the conflict afterwards. They had very they really didn't, they didn't know really at the time when they were setting up what they were doing. They didn't have a concept of an NGO or the international funding. They just recognized that their parents' generation had caused immeasurable damage to their society, and that it was their generation that was going to have to rebuild it. And so they founded Youth for Peace literally under the tree of a pagoda, and they started just by organizing young people to come together and talk about how they would build peace. They tried to figure out how they could reach out to Vietnamese youth, because Vietnam had invaded Cambodia and occupied Cambodia, and so there was a lot of enmity between Cambodians and Vietnamese at the time. They got a couple of international organizations who they met to give them $1,000, and
Mhm.
on $1,000 they ran a peace education program for 300 youth. They literally, Craig, they literally would take the masking tape off the wall from the flip charts they used
Mhm.
and fold it to save for the next day, until it just really wouldn't
Mhm.
stick anymore. So I met Rain right as that $1,000 was coming to its very end, and he looked at me and he said, "Do you want to work with us?" He said, "Great. You're going to help me organize a gathering of young people from across Southeast Asia. We can talk about how young people can build peace in the region." And I was like, "Well, you don't have a phone. You don't have a computer that works. The
Mhm.
office doesn't have lights." I was like, "You never used email. Like, how are you going to do this?" And he's like, "We can do it." And I thought, "Well, who am I, right?"
Mhm.
And so I joined this organization, and accompanied them for a time. And in that year, they came into funding. They opened up a youth center, together with a guy called Longket. We
Mhm.
set up a youth leadership program, which focused on really unleashing the power of young people to impact their own local communities. And that youth leadership program is still running
Mhm.
26 years later, amazingly. It served thousands and thousands of young people, because Cat really kept it and brought it as a core part of what Youth for Peace does. Youth for Peace then went on to organize these intergenerational dialogues that brought elders together with young people to speak openly about what had happened during the genocide, by the Khmer Rouge, and really opened up a lot of space around historical memory. And I think that being at Youth for Peace was one of the most fundamental and, quite frankly, rewarding and joyful experiences of my career.
And did you learn Khmer, or did you, in terms of language, like, so, and then, so one, like in terms of language, and two, I mean, some people say, I mean, obviously every country, every city, every community has lots of challenges. So like the idea is like you could go somewhere else outside your home region and contribute and get amazing experience. But what are what are your thoughts, like if someone, I mean, if someone is from Colombia and they go to Indonesia, that's one thing. But like, let's say a privileged
Yeah,
person, it's like, so what are your thoughts both on that? Did you have the language expertise to develop? And if someone's thinking about like, I need to get it, and the catch 22 now is worse than ever in terms of like, you
yeah.
need experience to get a job. A lot of places won't give you a job to get the experience. So like, your thoughts about like just going somewhere, whether that means like moving to a different city or your home community or overseas.
Yeah, I really understand what you're saying. I I recognize that. Firstly, this was another time, 2000 and
Mhm.
2001. And so, you know, uh, did I go with that kind of white savior complex? And I really understand that. So the way I would say is that, and this kind of harkens back to my parents, you know, I think that when I go around the world, no matter where I'm going, whether I'm going to, a conference at Harvard Business School or I'm going to a community somewhere, I engage it with the same mindset, which is around creating connection and relationships,
Mhm.
and recognizing that we bring mutual value to each other, no matter who I'm building a connection with. Just as I with you over 20 whatever years of friendship,
Mhm.
um, and so I approached it very much that way. sort of how do I go and be a listener and a learner, and and recognize value that people bring, and create value back. In that context, I studied Khmer. One of the first things I did was find a teacher. I got this amazing literature professor who was teaching Khmer, who spoke English, who not only taught me Khmer but also taught a lot about the culture and the stories. He taught me core myths. He told me the
Mm,
stories of Tom Tio, the first novel that was ever written in Khmer, etc. Um, and But the way I brought my value add was actually through my English, because I could write
mm,
proposals. I could do some things in terms of the use of language that I know that Ryan and Kat couldn't bring.
mm,
They were still learning English, and they both spoke English, but writing a proposal for an international donor was difficult. So I really leaned into that, and what value add I brought. But
mhm,
I was the most junior on the staff of anybody. I reported to the to Ren. I had a context where I didn't have any kind of particular authority, and that meant a lot. Um, I think in modern times that value of language, of English language, is very minimal. Now people are able to write, uh, you know, write as they need to for their donors, using AI, and Google Translate, etc. So, for me, the way I lean into this is about relationship and connections.
mhm,
How do you
mhm,
create connections and relationships? It harkens back to the very core thing we were talking about. That is actually a through line of our work, is around collective.
mhm.
There is something about collective power that comes through connection and relationships and sharing context. Um, so, yeah, thanks for asking. It's a hard and important
Yeah,
question.
no, I think when I moved overseas, I mean, I started an NGO with a friend when we were all, and we got funding before we had an organization, and we got all the detail, but I think I was a little more American, like, I don't know if it was white savior, but just a little bit more like, hey, there's like, we could do this. And like, we did a lot of interesting things, but it's also like, and understood the context. I spoke the language in Hungary, but it's like a little bit of that outsider perspective. And I think the longer I've worked, the more humble I've got. I mean, if you say you're humble, maybe you're not, but like, just realize like everybody's got wisdom and challenges. And if we just get off our soapbox and learn and understand, like we'd be much better off than exporting. So I want to go back to a conversation. This is kind of a random jump, but you went on to work for Search and Common Ground, lead their Asia programs. We based in Nepal for many years, but we had a conversation once. I think you were back in DC, and you were talking about Search for Common Ground. Actually, can you summarize a little bit what I mean? Just like what Search does. It's so much, and then like a little bit
Absolutely.
across your whatever 15, 20 years at Search. Like what has been the thread across the things you're doing within Search?
Sure. So Search is, it's an international organization that's, we talk about ourselves at times as a peace building organization. The through line for us has been around collaboration from the very early days of the organization's history. It was initially set up as a uh, it was initially set up in the Cold War as a kind of post Vietnam War organization. John Marks, our founder, had been part of the U.S. government effort in Vietnam as a USAID official. Came back like many Americans did from the war in Vietnam, radicalized and angry and determined to throw a wrench in the system. And he got a job with Senator Casey. He was one of the key people who drafted the legislation to defund the war. He wrote a series of books that were exposés of abuses by the CIA, including one that the government tried to block from publication, and took a case to the Supreme Court, which became a landmark Supreme Court uh, case on free speech. And he came out of all of those years and suddenly had this revelation that he didn't want to spend his life being against the system, trying to tear it down. He wanted to be for something. And what was it? And where he had seen the most progress happen is when people worked collaboratively and worked across those divides. He started really by bringing Americans and Soviets together, focused on nuclear nonproliferation,
Mm-hmm.
in line with your interest, Craig,
Mm-hmm.
as you're saying, recognizing the cataclysmic potential of nuclear conflict. But as he started to work at this core discipline of the common ground approach emerged. And so Search had a series of major leaps forward where we were able to, it was before my time, but establish presence in a number of contexts in Eastern Europe after the Berlin Wall fell, and really had a major breakthrough in Burundi when the genocide in Rwanda happened in 1994. Burundi teetered at the edge and had many similar experiences and was ethnically identical to Rwanda. And Search set up a radio studio there, Studio Ijambo, which had a combination of journalists from both Hutu and Tutsi backgrounds who covered news stories together, who covered the culture together, produced radio drama, all different kinds of things together. And it really gave rise to our core next generation of approach, which was this, what I called multi-partial early, this deeply rooted teams that come together from across the very divides that are ripping a society apart to do really practical things together to address those root causes of conflict. And that's been the through line for years. We've grew over our history of 40 plus years. We've worked in more than 50 countries. We've been working on and off in the United States since the very early days of the organization's history, and have over the last number of years a major commitment and a real expansion of our programming in the U.S. But we maintain teams all over the world who are generating really interesting results through this. One of the critical things about Search, coming back, kind of tying back to your earlier question, and one of the things that's most held me at Search is that our knowledge creation happens at the front lines. It's our colleagues who are actually practically trying different approaches and solutions to the conflicts that they're in, who generate really critical innovations, and those innovations then funnel back to the organization as a whole. And so all of it, we've done a ton of work around media for peace building. That's something that really was sparked in that Burundi office with that group of Burundians who
Mhm.
tried and experimented with a methodology and turned it into a technique. We have teams all over the world in Sri Lanka and Syria and other places who are using today deliberative tech to foster participation from broad public into key decision making and governance. And that knowledge being there is being driven back in. And so the other through line for us is that we're always pushing the boundaries, the next steps.
And then within that, I mean, a conversation we had 15, 20 years ago, I remember, I think you gave a talk in one of my classes, and you were helping to support Pakistan programming. And I remember you said something like, whatever Pakistan at that point, I think it's about 180 million now, maybe 200 million. I don't know what it was at that point, maybe 220. But you said, like, how with a limited budget, with media programming, can you find the leverage points to have the maximum impact, but also like what kind of impact? And so thinking both your role in Search and Search in general, because and again, like for the Common Ground Media Program, you had a whole studio for years, Common Ground Productions, and you've done
Yeah.
maybe in 30 countries, soap operas, edutainment, documentaries, and and what you talked about in Burundi, there was the, I think it was in Burundi, maybe it was in Rwanda, where you brought together people who saved people across the conflict divide, had a huge concert,
Brilliant.
and
Yeah.
in Macedonia, brought together Albanian and Macedonian journalists to cross report. But just like, what has been the thread of what you do, and like, how do you, because the challenges are so large in everywhere. So, and nobody has unlimited money, maybe Elon Musk, but so how do you, as whether you're helping to lead programming or supporting partners, like how do you find those leverage points? Because you could do there, it's unlimited what could be done. So it's like, what's the process you use or Search uses, either to secure the funding or be like, okay, this is like an area we think we can have an impact in collaboration, and how do you find the right ideas and differentiate failure, like experimentation from failure?
Okay. Couple of questions there.
It's a lot
Um,
of questions, sorry.
in the first, to me, there are these two levels to work at. One is the norms level or the societal level. Um, in over the course of my career, there were times when this was a lot easier, where we could produce a radio drama or television series that would reach a really significant percentage of the population. In 2006 to 2009, I was in Nepal, part of our team there, and the country was going through a peace process We produced dozens of radio shows. We had a great radio drama called Nayabato Nayapala, New Path, New Footprints, that was about
Mhm.
role modeling the power of young leaders to play a role at their community level in the peace process. And we could go to villages and people would know the show and they would tell you, I met a guy who told me, had been a soldier, child soldier, and he put down his weapons because of a character in the show. He said,
Mhm.
if Garga, the name of the character, could do it, I could do it. And he put his gun down, went home, and became a mediator. That kind of ability to have that influence on people's lives was really there. We live in a totally different environment today to
Mhm.
try to reach that broader society. So the real question, but we always knew that even with that kind of broad reach, it was still thin, right? You could change people's attitudes, you could change some norms, although norms are very dynamic things. Um, and so the real question was, how do you actually cause shifts in the right places and the right institutions that would sustain those norms changes? And so we go everywhere we work, we do that depth. It's always almost always focused on a really deep understanding in each place of what's the most significant structure that fuels conflict and that could fuel peace. And that knowledge, that insight comes from having a multi-partial team who come
Mhm.
together, who can see the conflict dynamics from different viewpoints and perspectives, and then create a collective vision that really is about tapping into the forces that are existing in any society that have the potential to unleash peace. And so our teams craft those visions.
Mhm.
And it's not individual leaders, it's collective visioning. Sometimes it's teams and partners. It depends on the context, how we actually. So when I say team, I mean it pretty broadly. But it comes out of a group of people who are able to say, if we did this and we build a theory of change from this place, that could have a broader resonating effect. And we look for, the term that John Marks often used was trim tab theory. Trim tab's the
Mhm.
part of the rudder on a ship or an airplane where the least amount of movement causes the most shift in the direction of the plane or the ship. We identify what are those things where a small change would trigger then a larger change across the whole system.
Mhm.
And so that identifying that can only really come about based on a collective insight, collective perspective of a group of people who come across divides.
And if when you talk to your donors or funders, whether they're bilaterals, multilaterals, foundations, individuals, like what's the data? I mean, obviously it's all context specific. Or let's say you're, DC. Kata's in the U.S. right now in DC, but let's say you're talking to someone and it's like that peace building stuff. It's a bunch of horse manure. It's just like hippies hugging trees. And so, like, what are the data points that you give? I mean, of course, there's failures. There's lots of failures, but like to
Of course.
say, taking this kind of locally led, innovative, multi-partial, collaborative, cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary approach produces results. So, like, what either like the stories
Yeah.
or the data that you show to your funders, or just like skeptics who are like common ground, like it's all about power.
Yeah, we've been grappling with this question as an
Mm-hmm.
organization, and I've been grappling with this question myself for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
We got very good at this organization over years at measuring outcomes. What are the media
Yeah.
effects? Like, yes, a kid listens to the show, he puts down his weapons, but what's the impact on a society? And we recognize that actually our whole sector, everybody who's working on peace building has been struggling with this question. Sometimes asking, countering us the way you just did, Craig, or, um, just asking like, well, what does impact look like? And we realized that, all of us talk about impact really differently. So we ran a process, and it was one of our colleagues who would be a great guest on this
Mm-hmm.
podcast, Dr.
Okay.
Adrian Lemon, who ran a
Mm-hmm.
huge global process engaging 300 organizations all over the world in dozens of countries. Ask the question, what would impact really look like?
Mm-hmm.
And we emerged with a framework, the Peace Impact Framework, out of that process, which identified five. What we're now talking about as the vital signs of a
Mm-hmm.
healthy society, which are the things that really appear, whether it's at a community or a national level, and you can really track indicators to really see whether that is driving peace. And so look at physical safety, looking at levels of violence and people's perceptions of physical safety is one. Um, Trust is another, and communal trust is the way we talk about it. So the way that people relate to each other across a society's diversity, and the perceptions of that relationship. Then institutional legitimacy, the way in which people trust their institutions and how institutions engage them, and then personal agency, the power that people feel like they have as an influence over their own communities, and then lastly, resources. What kind of resources are people and institutions putting into processes, systems, and structures that drive peace? And we are now able to track those. What's really interesting is that a lot of our organizations are using the Peace Impact Framework. There's dozens of governments across sub-Saharan Africa who have picked up the Peace Impact Framework or a variation of it in whole or in part, in order to measure the effects of the Youth Peace and Security National Action Plans that they're putting into place. We have a lot of other organizations, UN Peacebuilding Support Office is using parts of the Peace Impact Framework as well. So it's starting to gain, and what's really important, it's starting to create for us some shared vocabulary and shared construct for how to measure peace and be able to really show the data, that what kind of effect and impact that we're having.
Wonderful, and also Institute for Peace and Economics. Their Global Peace Index. I was at their launch event, and there is good data. So going to, and then we'll move on after this. But going to, like, imagine I'm a skeptic, and I'm just like, hippies, you had your chance, like, you
Hmm.
lost. And the world is based on power and resources and extraction, and basically whoever has the most power wins. But that's one approach. But, like, is there any data? Because, like, UNDP or University of Bradford used to have this data, like every dollar invested in conflict prevention saves, like, $10 or $20 in future costs. But that data was so, like, I never found, like, it just wasn't reliable. So if you're talking to someone who's a real skeptic who's in some position of power, like, stories are incredibly powerful, but is there a data point? And a lot of people, like, I was on the board of Alliance for Peacebuilding, and lots of people, not just me, everyone was talking about, like, why is it that when there's a challenge in the world, like a security challenge, often bombing is the solution? Like, it's an action, or taking someone out or jailing, or, like, because it's a visible, tangible thing. But why is it not, you know, negotiation, understanding, like, like, the response by a lot of powers, particularly certain ones, seems to be like, I used to teach on terrorism, we got to take out the security threat. So just, like, any data you have of, like, if organizations or countries or companies, you can even speak at a company level, adapt these kind of approaches, like, here's what some data might show in terms of it's more effective or happier employees, or, like, we're going to have a safer world.
Yeah, I'll answer that in a moment. I also wonder what data points people who are utilizing violence have to demonstrate that violence improves their security,
Mm-hmm.
um, or achieves their political objectives. I think there's also a big perception gap between that. It just, that people are not utilizing a data set to
Mm-hmm.
justify the enormous amount of use of force as a response to conflict. It doesn't actually
Right.
very often result in what people want it to result in, with this increased security and prosperity. There is a growing evidence body of evidence across our sector that shows a number of things. It is a very kind of core starting point. If you look at the SDGs, there is a clear correlation between those societies that have not accomplished their SDGs and where, or have not had, real measurable progress across all of their development indicators, and the presence of violent conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Those societies have had a huge regression in terms of their core human development indicators. Are often societies, very often, are societies where conflict has been actually at the very core of that regression. So a place like Syria, the United States is experiencing a regression of almost all of its core development indicators around health, education, you know uh, economic indicators for individual families, etc. And that is something that correlates with the conflict dynamics that are manifesting in the United States with a society that's divided. And so this is, to me, there is actually a real correlation between societies where conflict is handled and managed in a really powerful, constructive way, and conflict is a source of progress as opposed to a destructive force, and the broader trajectory of prosperity and democracy and the well-being of people as measured by the indicators that we've agreed upon as a society, as being as a world, as being core. At a more micro level, we have a ton of evidence that shows that when people engage in non-adversarial solutions to conflict, it's less expensive. They create results that are much more likely to endure, that are much more practical in their orientation and create broader benefits. And so there is quite a body of evidence.
Mhm.
We have a ways to go as a sector to continue to make that case and expand that. But right now we're in a world which is really underinvested in this kind of approach, which is why Search has made this pivot to really trying to advance collaborative leadership. The world is hugely overinvested in adversarial approaches, and the trends are all going in that direction now. Right now, there's a huge amount of resources being pulled out of education, healthcare, all kinds of core human-centered things, and being put into militarization. The world is more armed than it's ever been, and it's getting more and more armed. And so, we're actually in an environment where we're trying to prove results against a
Mhm.
context where the resources are being directed to, and the economy is built around adversarial footing to conflict. And so we really need to be investing in and thinking about a different approach that is much more collaborative, where
Mhm.
we've seen plenty of really powerful and real results that could be something that we could be leveraging
Mhm.
and generating benefits to others.
So you just gave me an idea of a thought I had a long time ago. So I'm doing a lot of vibe coding. So I vibe coded. It's a beta project where it's for the impact sector. You can put in, hey, this is my career. This is where I'm based, and like how is AI going to impact my job, salary wise, skill wise, and it's evidence based. And I
Yeah,
remember having this conversation with people 20 years ago. So like where and Milt Lowenstein, lots of people in Search and Juliet Partners, they're all talking about this USIP when it used to exist. Like, so where's the central data point? Because it's all scattered, and it'd be interesting to have like something that's evidence based, where you can say, you know, where aggregate across all the places, like and use the good aspects of AI. Say like, I'm looking at immediate because I use this in some of the stuff I've written, like even like construction disputes. If a construction disputes or a contract dispute goes to mediation or arbitration, one, the settlement rate tends to be higher, and the cost tends to be like, I don't remember, this is like a long time ago, maybe $8,000 versus 500,000. But to have a place where you can kind of say, this is the context and what is the reliable existing data sets that would help me show or not show. Anyway, so it's interesting. I mean, maybe Search or others are doing that. um, so a question, then we'll move on to some career stuff. So
yeah,
given the enormity of the challenges, like you've seen lots of amazing, incredible people and organizations and positive impact, but it's also like USAID, which I've never I've never was a full-time employee, but I've consulted and contracted many times and was a big funder of media and development and peace building, and you know so it's gone. USIP gone. And just like the amount of military, if people want to know military spending, look at CIPRI. They do an annual report, but like there's enough money in the world to, I won't say solve, but address all of our challenges, at least like make a decent start. But the world is not operating in a way that's making sure everyone has clean health, like health, water, education, housing. So like, how do you stay optimistic given both, like the human, I mean, I live in Colombia, it's messed up, but how do you stay optimistic both given like the huge challenges at the macro level, but also all the setbacks you see among partners and colleagues?
I think that we have more opportunity now to advance our mission than we have ever had in the 40 years this organization has existed, and in the 25 plus years of my career,
Mhm.
actually. Um, why? Because more actors, more people who carry all different kinds of levels of influence, whether it's activists with networked influence or people in institutions, actually are recognizing that the approach we have to dealing with conflict is failing us, and bringing us closer and closer to the brink. And so there's more bubbling interest in transforming conflict than we've ever seen or perceived before. And the question is whether we can meet that moment. It's the core of why I'm doing the job I'm doing, because what I have seen is that a collaborative approaches create breakthroughs. I've seen it work at work in some of the harshest environments in the world, but executed and delivered by people who are peace builders, fit into our sector. And so what I'm most excited about is that there are all these other people who want to play a constructive role, and so we need to break the walls off of who we think of as a peace builder,
Mhm.
because actually the number of people playing a role in conflict is increasing. And so how do we equip people in all kinds of positions of leadership to play a really big role? That's what common ground leadership is about. We're equipping folks. There's courses that we're offering. People can access. You can go onto our website. It's www.commongroundleaders.org, to find this, or you can find it through the search for Common Ground website. And for me, what keeps me optimistic is that there's so many people out there who recognize that we need a change and are trying to lean
Mhm.
into it, equip themselves, network with each other, advocate for that kind of a change. We are going through a period of complete disruption. Civil society around the world is indeed going through essentially an economic collapse as a result of the international aid sector uh, contracting so substantially. And at the same time, people are organizing in all kinds of new ways, and there's a whole new generation of organizing and thinking and network building and network weaving that's manifesting by actors all over the world. That's fascinating. And so there's
Mhm.
an and young activists are not waiting around for USAID to come back in the next administration. They're just organizing in new ways, and finding resources of different kinds. And so that gives me a lot of hope. I actually think we're not going back. The question is what's next,
Mhm.
and whether that next wave of civic action can have the really constructive effects that we need it to, as we pivot from one world order toward another, and see if we can avoid a cataclysm. So
I certainly hope so for both our sake, our kids' sake, and the billions of other people around the world. So I want to ask a few career questions because
yeah,
you're let's say senior. Hopefully you have many more. Hopefully you'll work for many more years, but you are senior. And
brave new world.
so one just very practical question, just not even getting into AI. When you've hired, what makes a difference for when you? I mean, obviously you often hire in teams, but when you receive an application, and let's just do this pre-generative AI, and then we'll talk about AI, like what makes a difference for you and the team in deciding, if you get, I mean, now I talked to an employer 2 weeks ago, I was on her podcast, they're getting 2 to 5,000 applications because of AI slop and also just competition. But let's say like a normal time before that, like you get 200, 300, 1,000 applications. Like, how do you decide who to interview? Like, what makes a difference, and what's your advice to candidates?
So, hmm, um, it's a bit of a hard question to answer because it's obviously dependent on what I'm hiring for.
Right.
Um, I'm looking for people who are able to demonstrate real results in their
Mm-hmm.
work and able to identify their contribution to those results. I'm definitely looking for people who are curious. Curiosity is right now, I think, one of the most important core. I don't want to call it a competency, but maybe it is. It's
Mm-hmm.
really a core competency, because things are changing so quickly. The ability to demonstrate results in the past world, even 5 years ago, it's awfully different from trying to generate
Mm-hmm.
results, in the next 5 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the differentiator really is people who are demonstrating a really deep sense of curiosity. And personally, I look for purpose. I look for clear focus on purpose, some real understanding of what it is that somebody wants to accomplish, and where they understand themselves fitting into that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then for people who come to you now, considering both the implosion of, you know, USAID, USIP, but also a lot of bilateral funders are cutting back. So if someone that's the average age of our audience, let's say is 35, but let's say someone's like, I want to work for purpose, I want to do peace building or international development or something. Like, obviously it's context specific, skill specific, but do you have any advice, like grad school or not grad school, or like these are the skills regardless of the role that you see are going to be more critical in the next couple of years to have a potential chance? Or don't even try to be in this sector, just get a job, because a lot of people are struggling. Just get any job as long as you can pay the bills.
So here's what I see as the difference between people who are on their front foot versus their back foot in building their careers in the world today. And this is the advice I got this very early in my career from actually my current boss, and who's the CEO of Soliya, which is this: is to center your integrity on your objective. So really, to identify what is it that you want to accomplish in the world, and then look for a platform upon which you can build that change or build toward that change, rather than thinking about what role you want to play. Because whatever role you think you want to play based on who you're meeting isn't really necessarily relevant to the world in the future. So, you might look at me, oh, you want to have a job like Michael and be a VP for an international NGO like Search. Well, is that the future? How many people are going to have that kind of a role or position? But rather really think, like, what is it that I want to achieve in the world today? And what is it that I can accomplish, where is it I can go sit and fit and to use as a platform toward accomplishing that result? That is a mindset distinction that I see in people. And those who really do that then are looking for, and not just looking for, they're attracting opportunities, resources, platforms upon which they can actually drive that change. And I would really center on that.
Okay. And then any other skills that I would say even fundraising is changing, but obviously with a lot of implosion, like there still are a good amount of roles for fundraisers, like, so, or skill sets. I mean, one is like the purpose, integrity, curiosity, like just go out and experiment, do network, but any, in your 20, 30 years in the sector where you see it going, like, again, I think people who speak tech and human, I mean, it used to be go get coding, go learn how to, like I was talking to my mom yesterday, one of her friends has a granddaughter, did everything right, computer science, can't get a job. So the idea is like get a coding. So there is no certainty anymore. But like, I think people who speak tech and human, or tech human and policy, or tech human and building are more likely to be employed. So is there any, like, let's say cross-sectoral areas that you say that are more likely to lead to opportunity, or at least impact?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think AI is going to have, and over the next years, is going to have a pretty equalizing effect on people's technical side of their professional capabilities, right? So, 5 years ago, I might have said, yeah, like lean into learning how to be a great proposal writer and learn how to do program design. That is not that's not necessarily a differentiator in the world. I actually think that the differentiators in the future are really very much about our humanity, and the human relational side of the work. And I would lean in really hard. If I were building a career now and starting, I'd be really leaning in very hard to building out a whole toolkit of skills that are about people relationships, how to mobilize partnerships, how to create coalitions, how to create conversations that are transformative and deep, how to attract resources through people to people relationships. I think that's going to be the thing that creates competitive advantage for people and for institutions in the future.
Okay. Yeah, it's really interesting. And so we have an impact community in Medellin, so we meet up. There's a couple of them, but like I started one, we have about 200, 160, 200 people. And we meet up like when someone interesting in town, but also we just meet up periodically. And it's like, there's something magical. Like, and I use a lot of AI tools, even like Bordy is this amazing AI tool that does human connections. Yeah. But there's still something like, 20 of us sat in a room, and a friend of ours, like, manages a cafe. So we sat there for like 2.5 hours. And it's like, that need for community and space across sectors to both build, but also be like, I'm struggling with that. Like that is good. But it's also like, as you talked about, how do you design those spaces, whether it's, online or human or technology, like so many places where people convene, the process is not that anyone has the answers, but the process is so poorly designed and results in poor outcomes. And so it's like part of it is the architecture of convening, or Priya Parker, but like that space, like how do
Right.
you help design that's culturally and context specific, and that is also humble, that you don't just throw people together. Like there's an art and a science and just like
Yeah.
some mischief and serendipity to it. So I think that's one of the areas.
I tell young folks who are getting into their careers all the time that to lean in really hard into facilitation as a
Yeah.
skill set, not mediation. I mean, mediation is also obviously a form of facilitation that's very useful, but facilitation, which is about how do you create processes that bring folks together and create real results that create that arc.
Yeah.
And that is something that I think is going to be more and more necessary as all of the technical capabilities level out across all different kinds of companies and organizations and activists, etc. It's like that's going to be where you create change, is through the
Mhm.
ability to facilitate.
So, getting back to common ground leadership, as we started off with, and we'll finish in a few minutes. So, let's say someone is watching this now or listening in the future to the podcast episode, the audio episode. Um, I mean, I got a lot of facilitation experience through my PhD, just doing things. Like, one, I didn't know what I was doing, but I did it. Learning, community facilitation, professional facilitation, and it really is, and also just doing some amazing workshops, some that I ran, but also just with other people. Um, and so within common ground leadership, if someone, whether they're working for a community-based NGO in Indonesia, or a bank in Bogota, like what are you all offering around? I mean, there's so many different things, but let's say facilitation or other skills. Like, how does someone participate as an individual, or services, or an organization get into what you're offering?
Absolutely. We're offering a leadership development program that equips people to do exactly what I've been talking about through this, to be able to forge unusual coalitions with people who are their perceived adversaries to create real practical action oriented results together. So it's
Mm-hmm.
not you were talking about the hippy dippies. It's not all about that. It's actually really a very practical program that equips
Mm-hmm.
people to say, I have a real problem. Who do I need to enroll? How do I actually create a solution to that problem in a new way? And it's
Mm-hmm.
applicable to somebody who's sitting in a bank in Bogota, or leading a movement in Sri Lanka or wherever.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's available. We have three different levels of it. A discovery course. We have a full online program, high touch facilitated program that's facilitated by people who are, we call common ground leaders, people who have
Mm-hmm.
led for search programs that are have really achieved results in highly
Mm-hmm.
divided contexts. And then there's a premium version that has an in-person component, which has so much value. And
Mm-hmm.
people can go online, they can apply. They can also bring their whole institution to be part of it. And so I would encourage you can look at our website. I said it before. It's
Yeah.
commongroundleaders.org, and you can find a way to sign up for more information, and then that'll take you down a path if you're interested. Eventually, that's going to fuel a network of common ground leaders, people who
Mm-hmm.
want to assert this kind of leadership and work collaboratively. I would also encourage people want to learn that skill of facilitation. I would encourage people to look at Soliya, which
Mm-hmm.
is now part of AFS, called Intercultural Programs. You can find them on soliya.net, but they have a second to none, top notch facilitation training program, which trains you how to facilitate really complex conversations in highly tense environments. And I would look at that as an additional resource. That's really an exceptional program
Mm-hmm.
that has a lot of value, engaging college, university students, and high school students all over the world.
And the more facilitation experience you can get with others, like in a reflective way, and don't start too dangerous unless you need to.
Exactly.
But like, start simple. It's like, and what works and doesn't work, because it's partially. And there's a lot of good books, and I love I'm going blank, but I've been trained by people like Arnie, not Arnie Mindell, but people in his philosophy. But then there's another um, there's a whole free handbook online. I'm going blank, but I'll put it in the show notes of just like how to use this, and all, like, it's about 60 to 80 different exercises you can build for all kinds of spaces, and they've used a lot in the corporate sector, and it's open source. So to start wrapping up, so three things. One, any book or movie or show that's occupying your brain in a good way. It doesn't have anything to do with work, but just like, hey, this is interesting. People may want to look.
Oh, interesting. One of my favorite books that I've read, it's probably my favorite book I've read in the last 10 years or so. It's called No Friend But the Mountains by a guy called, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. His name is Berhuz Buchani.
Mhm.
Um, and he was a Kurdish Iranian who fled Iran and went to Australia and was arrested as he was on a boat trying to get
Mhm.
to Australia and ended up in on Easter Island, which was the prison camp that the Australians set up for asylees.
Yeah.
Somebody smuggled him a phone and he wrote a whole book on WhatsApp about the experience. And even if it wasn't written on WhatsApp, quite frankly, it was, even without knowing that, it's one of the most beautiful and harrowing books I've ever read. And he won the National Book Prize equivalent of
Mhm.
Australia for it. And it is really a worthwhile read. I really love that book. I recommend it to everybody.
Okay. Yeah, and there's a Netflix series. I forgot the name. It's not directly on Eastern Island, but it's about the, let's say, the number of migrants who've been detained in insane situations in Australia. I mean, obviously the U.S. is now doing even worse, but
When you're
um,
doing this, yeah.
yes. What are you in your free time? What are you working on upskilling or learning, or hope to learn, or at least or at least get better at?
I'm doing a master's degree in photography, in documentary
Hmm.
photography, and which has been an incredibly rich experience at the Barcelona School of Design. They have a
Hmm.
program that's online with fellow students from all over the world, actually.
Hmm.
And so that's an interesting thing to be upskill. I've always loved photography. My mother was
Hmm.
a amateur photographer and had a big impact on me. And so visual storytelling, the ability to tell compelling stories through images is something that I've always loved.
Okay, and
Completely
then
unwork
what?
related. Well, maybe partially unwork related.
And do you aspire? I mean, obviously, to use it in work, get hired to do community events, or you're just experimenting to see where it might go.
Honestly, Craig, I thought, as the USA and State Department budget cuts and everything happened, I didn't have a sense really of my future, like everybody else. And a good friend of mine said, make sure you land in a vehicle. And so I was like, what have I always wished to do? Be a photographer. And I found this program and I signed up before I had got this job to lead Common Ground Leadership. And
Mm-hmm.
so, do I aspire to be a photographer? I don't know. I don't know. I think that it's something that I want to use as a tool to tell stories and to talk about things that are really important to me. There's all kinds of really cool ways to do that. And so it's more about really building out my underpinning skill set, uh,
Mm-hmm.
and, constantly expanding that in new ways. I think that's one of the most important. You asked about like what you look for. I talk about
Yeah.
curiosity. I think we all need to be doing that all the time.
Yeah.
And so this is the latest one.
Cool. But if anybody is looking to hire a photographer for a social impact event, maybe get in contact with Michael. And then
Sure.
the last question, I actually said the guy, our developer for PCDN, like he's just part time, but he's like self-taught. He's brilliant. I mean, I'm always learning. He's always learning, but he's a brilliant photographer. So he's photographed
Oh,
some events for and he's been. I don't know how many small towns we have in Antioquia, but his goal is to get to all the small towns in Antioquia, and like just has the best, most incredible. He's a full time. Now he works, in a bank, but like it's like but photograph, and he has like a camera from 100 years ago. So it's like it's a passion, and he's amazing. So he does it on the side. But so last question: what's the best if people both want to follow you as an individual and then search, or if they want to get in contact with you, is it LinkedIn? Do you have your own website? And then, or newsletter? Do you do any blogging? And then obviously search, you've already talked about it, but just remind people, go to the website, get in the newsletter, follow search. And like, is there a best channel to be engaged with you and or search?
so the best channel to engage with me is to follow me on LinkedIn. I use it all the time, posting constantly there. And Common Ground Leadership has a LinkedIn page. Search for Common Ground also has a LinkedIn page.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would definitely follow Search. We're on all of the major, all the major platforms. You can follow us on Instagram, etc. And go to our website, www.sfcg, as in search for common ground.org. Sign up there. There's we have all kinds of things going on. There's events, there's town halls with our teams, which are around the world talking about critical issues. The last town hall, I don't know if it's the last one, but we had folks from Lebanon and Iraq talking about the war in the Middle East and its effects on real people's lives and on our work. So you can get all kinds of interesting access to information and be part of a broader network. So follow us on those. Those are the
Okay.
best places. And for me, it's LinkedIn.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. Any last suggestions, input?
My last thing I would say, Craig, is I think that we all need to own the work that we're doing around social impact as a form of resistance in the world today. It is the most important. Like, we're in a world where it's just fracturing, with authoritarianism on the rise. You know, with war drums beating that have such cataclysmic potential. Um, this work that we're doing is central and critical to our future, and everybody needs to keep it up and own how powerful and important it is against all of the odds and against all of the currents that are running against us, and just be proud of that and own that, and keep at it no matter what.
Okay. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon. And thank you, everyone, for watching and then listening in the future.